Welcome to Two-Way Tonight. I'm Mark Halperin. It's Tuesday, April 22nd, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and my phone is going crazy. There's a lot of news. Biggest news day I can remember in a while. Nothing earth-shattering, so you don't need to go sell your portfolio or anything, but a lot of stuff. So we're going to get to the news, and then Doug Sosnik will be here. I've known him for decades. Brilliant strategist, worked with Bill Clinton, has slide decks that, when they come out every so often, transfix the political world. And Doug is nice enough to come share some of the slides with us and talk about how he sees things. He's like a top political operative and an historian. And although he's a Democrat and a partisan, I should say, he's very fair-minded. So if you don't know Doug's work, or if you do, you'll be delighted to see him, and he'll be here shortly after I run through today's headlines. And then, what a surprise, opportunity for you all to ask Doug and myself questions. If you're here on the Two-Way platform, raise your hand. Watching on X, YouTube, don't raise your hand. Don't put smack in the chat. Please, in all your communications around this platform, even in your own head, as you're thinking about other people talking, what I say, peace, love, and understanding, presumption of grace for all, you'll be much happier. You'll sleep better. We just don't need all this hatred on the platform or anywhere else. And this is why we try to think we're at least a little bit different. Okay. Lots of news. I'm going to speed through it because I want to leave a lot of time with Doug. On the economic front, we talked in the morning meeting this morning about two things in particular that were troubling not just markets, but investors and the business community at large. One was the uncertainty about dealing with China. Where are we headed in the world's two largest economies at loggerheads and at odds? And then second was the president's relentless criticism over the last few days of Chairman Powell. And we kind of talked this morning about, well, wouldn't it be nice if the White House could somehow back down off those two things? Lo and behold, today they did. First, Scott Bessent spoke this morning at a JP Morgan Chase multi-day event going on in Washington. It was a closed event, a private event, but somehow word got out about what Scott Bessent said to the folks there. This is 2B. He basically said the talks with China haven't started yet, but a long-term trade war with China is not sustainable. It cannot be sustained by both sides. The two world's largest economies will have to find a way to de-escalate. The de-escalation will come in the very near future, Bessent said, characterized the current situation as essentially a trade embargo. Music to the ears of those who would like to see de-escalation, and Scott Bessent very purposely said those things. I can't tell you 100% fact that his people put out what happened, but I think probably the Treasury Department is not unhappy. I know they're not unhappy. The people know that Scott Bessent said what he said about China. Later in the day, the president spoke in the Oval Office, and he said much the same thing to C.
What happens, but ultimately they have to make a deal because otherwise they're not going to be able to deal in the United States. So we want them involved, but they have to, and other countries have to make a deal. And if they don't make a deal, we'll set the deal. Because we're the ones that set the deal. Scott and Howard and myself and others, we're going to be setting the deal, and it'll be a fair deal for everybody, and it'll be, I think it's a process that's going to go pretty quickly. We've spoken to many, many countries, and we're getting their views on things. You know, there are a lot of things. They have VAT taxes. They have everything you can have. Don't forget, as an example, the European Union was set up to take advantage of the United States. That's why it was set. And they've done that, but they're not doing that anymore.
So, again, there's going to be choppiness. But on the 2 points that markets and investors were most concerned about, as I said, China and Chairman Powell, the words of Bessent and the words of the president, those are going to be indelible for a while. Even if there are ups and downs, the markers they laid out today, I can practically guarantee you, are going to be comforting to markets. On Powell, much the same thing. Here's the president, same photo op, 2A. Sounds to my ear like a new songbook from President Trump regarding Chairman Powell. 2A, please.
You have no intention of firing Jerome Powell because your economic advisor Kevin Hassett a few days ago said that you and people in the White House were studying this idea of possibly before his term ends. No. Do you have any plans on doing that?
None whatsoever. Never did. The press runs away with things. No, I have no intention of firing him. I would like to see him
No,
be
sorry,
a
this
little
is
more
wrong.
active in terms of his
Oh, no, sorry, this is right. This
idea
is right.
to
Sorry.
lower interest rates. This is a perfect time to lower interest rates. If he doesn't, is it the end? No, it's not. But it would be good timing. She could have taken place earlier. But no, I have no intention to fire him.
So again, not normal presidential behavior to tell the Fed what to do. Most presidents stay away from that, but some have dabbled there. And again, he could reverse course, but just like with the China words from the Secretary of the Treasury and from the president's words today about Powell will be pretty indelible. They will be reassuring because the tone was different, and he said, "I'm not going to fire him," whereas previously he suggested he might. So comes at a good time for the president to try to reassure on the economy. We'll talk about that with Doug Sosnik. Number one, Gallup polling today on how Americans feel about the economy. And you can see in this Gallup chart, Americans' outlook for personal finance. Right now, do you think your financial situation as a whole is getting better or getting worse? You can see there, getting worse is majority, and that's in the history of Gallup, that's not so great. Very bad data. Okay. So that's what I got to tell you about the economy, I believe. Yes. All right. So that's the economy. One other thing. Vice President Vance in India, encouraging words from the administration and Vance about a possible deal with India and Japan. I have predicted India, Japan, England are likely to be amongst the first three deals. And lots of discussion in administration about announcing frameworks as opposed to final deals. There's no final deal, but again, it's a third thing that'll reassure the markets. Bilateral deals, de-escalation of the conversation about China, de-escalation of hostility towards Powell. These will all be taken as very positives in the world. All right, and as if there weren't, we needed the evidence. The Dow was up like 1,000 points today on all of this because again, this is what the markets wanted to hear. All right, now next topic is Zelensky today pushed back on the notion that America would support a deal involving the formal ceding of Crimea to Russia. Everybody has known for a long time, unfortunately, because it's not fair, that Russia is going to keep Crimea in any peace deal. Zelensky's pushing back on that. We'll have to see where that goes. New York Times is reporting that Secretary Rubio is not going to go to the next round of negotiations with Ukraine. Not sure what that means. Speaking of the State Department, a long-awaited reorg was announced today by the Secretary of State Rubio's office. Lots of changes, lots of reorg, lots of cuts. We'll see what Capitol Hill says about it. But this is part of Doge. Speaking of Doge, Elon Musk on the Tesla earnings call just a little while ago, during which they announced a sharp decline in revenue from people believe the political fallout of Musk being involved in Doge, announced that he was going to be leaving Doge relatively soon. Not sure he put a timeline on it, but he suggested probably to reassure his shareholders that he was going to be leaving relatively soon. Also, a judge ruled today that the Voice of America workers can go back to work and said, we need to look more closely at the shutting down of VOA. That's one of those district court rulings that I don't talk much about. Speaking of courts, New York court, jury ruled that Sarah Palin, I think it was a jury, not a judge, pretty sure, that Sarah Palin was not libeled by the New York Times. So the New York Times beat Sarah Palin in that case. Speaking of the media, trying to do a lot of smooth transitions here to speed through this. The relatively long time head of 60 Minutes stepped down today, saying he was not pleased with the direction that the parent company was headed in resolving a settlement with Team Trump over the interview that they did with Kamala Harris. I find this case to be ridiculous. Misleading edits in television news magazine programs are what they do. I can't believe the CBS is really going to settle this case and give money for a misleading edit. But apparently they appear to maybe be headed in that direction, causing the longtime head of 60 Minutes to step down. All right. Last topic I want to get to before we bring in Doug is Pete Hegseth. The New York Times is reporting that the information he shared in the Signal chat that included his wife, his brother, and his lawyer and others came from a secure site. In other words, Pete Hegseth has consistently maintained that the information shared in the original Signal that caused the first flap was not information that was improperly shared over Signal. He's saying the same thing about this. The New York Times is reporting, no, in fact, it came from a secure place. Now, unsecure information that could be properly shared on Signal could come from a secure place. It doesn't, by definition, mean that everything in the secure place needs to stay secure. So secure it can't be on Signal, I suppose. But I think the bigger message to me from that New York Times story is the concept that there's enemies of Hegseth who are talking to the press and putting stuff out are going to continue to do that. And we talked about that the last 2 days on this platform. He has a problem. He's chalking up the problem to haters and anti-Trump or neocons or the media or people who want to hurt, deep state people who want to hurt him. I can tell you firsthand knowledge that there may be some of that, to be sure, but there's also people who love MAGA, love the president, and have been close to Pete Hegseth, who are also telling tales out of school. What their exact motives are, I can't say, but they clearly are not trying to do the best they can for Pete Hegseth. Now, today, Caroline Levitt at her briefing spoke supportively, as she has for the last 2 days, about Pete Hegseth. And she said a bunch of other stuff at the briefing about China, about Harvard, etc. RFKJ had his press conference today talking about kids' health issues and the banning of food dye. Let's look a little bit of that one, number 11, please.
And these are a broad category. The ones that Marty mentioned, like ADHD, the neurological disorders, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, and autism. All of these are injuries that I never heard of when I was a kid. They were not part of the nomenclature. They weren't part of the dialogue. There was zero spent in this country treating chronic disease when my uncle was president. Today it's about $1.8 trillion annually. It's bankrupting our nation. 74% of American kids cannot qualify for military service. Well, how are we going to maintain our global leadership with such a sick population? We have all these autoimmune diseases, these exotic diseases. And again, I never heard of juvenile diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Crohn's disease, and 100 others that were just unknown when I was a kid.
All right. I'll say there's some similarities, through lines between Secretary Kennedy and Secretary Hegseth. They're both running massive departments. They both are making radical in the sense of fundamental change about the policies the department oversees. They both have internal critics within their departments about disorganization, about maybe going too far. And they're both doing things that are inspiring tens of millions of people because they're engaged in the kind of change that in the case of Pete Hegseth, MAGA, in the case of Secretary Kennedy, MAHA, that are super popular with a lot of Americans. So interesting to see them both out there today, and obviously interesting to see where they end up at the end of this whole thing. All right. There's more stories that I could get to. If we made the whole show just me doing a faux newscast, we could do more. But that's enough, because I want to bring Doug Sosnik in. Doug Sosnik, one of the smartest people I've ever met, and a frequent visitor to these quarters. And Doug, if you could unmute, thank you for joining. Very grateful to you for being part of this. A lot of people like to do the rapid round at the end. I like to do the rapid round at the start. Who's going to win the NBA title?
I think the Celtics.
The Celtics. There'll be a repeat.
A repeat.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm very impressed with Oklahoma and Cleveland. Very impressed.
I have on my wall here, if you can see on the.
Yeah.
That's a lithograph of Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell that's actually signed by both of them.
Wow. That's a nice piece. Doug used to work with the NBA and is a big fan, and is from North Carolina. Doug, where are you from in North Carolina?
I'm from Winston-Salem.
Yeah. Who else is from Winston-Salem?
Jim Jordan and Bates, the guy from the Biden White House.
There you go. Um, what makes you a Democrat?
Oh, I grew up, 100 years ago, and basically the difference between Democrats and Republicans was the Democrats' view of the role of government, whether they should have a role and what the role was. And I thought and still believe that the role, the government should be enabling people, no matter where they come from, to have an opportunity to get ahead in life. And I think that was what drew me to being a Democrat. And obviously, there's been some wear and tear along the way about whether or not people believe that government's able to deliver on that. But that's what made me a Democrat.
What's the funniest Bill Clinton story you can tell in under 30 seconds?
I don't know. I can think of a lot of funny stories. I'm not sure I can tell any of them.
Yeah, even in 2 hours, because they're not necessarily safe for work. You had a lot of funny times with Bill Clinton. I'll just leave it at that. Very underrated as a provider of humor, both purposely and not on purpose, I
A
would
lot
say.
of them not on purpose.
Yeah. When did you first, what were the circumstances of your first meeting with Bill Clinton?
So I didn't work in the 1992 reelect. I was working as chief of staff to Chris Dodd, and I was hired in the beginning of 1994. I had uh, experience in the House and the Senate in 1993. The Clinton White House had a lot of problems with dealing with people on the Hill, House and Senate, so they hired me. And I guess what I do remember, I never met him for the first year I worked there, and I do remember that when he was interviewing me to become political director, uh, this was right after the 94 midterms, which is at the time was the worst midterm for a sitting president since World War II. And he told me how much he was looking forward to the upcoming campaign. And at that point, no one thought he could possibly win. And I was shocked that he was looking forward to the campaign. And I asked him why. And what he explained to me, which I totally understand now, is that he said, when you run a campaign against somebody, you're being measured against that person and not being measured, I guess Biden calls it by the God Almighty. But he thought a campaign would give him a chance to be able to make his case to the American public and to also contrast his vision for the future to his opponent. And I think if you look back, I don't want to get off track here, but if you look back at presidents who got reelected, inevitably, if you look at the job approval ratings, they weren't able on their own to turn their job approval ratings around. But in the cases of the presidents who got reelected, in Clinton and Bush and Obama, you could see that once they had an opponent and they were graded on the curve, so to speak, that was really the only time they were able to define their presidency um, the way they wanted. And you can see tracking the job approval that was really what enabled them to do that. And so, in a lot of ways, in politics, you're often defined not by who you are, but rather who you're against.
Right. We'll talk about those themes in just a second as we go through some of your slides. And I'll say one of the things that happened is the Bush people studied how Clinton got reelected and used all the lessons that they could. And the Obama people did the same thing. They looked at both the Clinton experience and the Obama and the Bush experience, and they benefited from how to, particularly the question, how to define your opponent. Are you saying you had not met Bill Clinton until you started working in the White House, like literally never met him?
Never met him.
That's amazing. It's amazing. I didn't know that. Someday I'll tell you the story of how I met him, but that'll be for another day. All right, here's what we're going to do. Basically, three parts here. We're going to run through Doug's latest slides. Well, four. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Doug. Then we're going to run through Doug's slides. Then third, Doug and I are going to talk a little bit about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and then your questions. And we're going to do all that in the next 40 minutes. So buckle up and strap in because we got a lot to do. Doug is a Democrat, as you know, but he's a Democrat who sees things clearly and says things honestly about both his own party and the Republican Party. It's what makes him so sought after for his point of view, because a lot of partisans just spin and don't say anything critical about their own party. Doug wants the Democrats to succeed, and part of that is to speak the truth. Doug also, as I say, does these slides, these slide decks. Doug is sensitive to history. He knows the past is often prologue, but not always. And one of the things I admire most about him is he can say, well, this happened in the past and it's likely to happen again, or at least inform the future. Or this happened in the past, but here's why things are different this time, or might be different this time. So don't assume the past is prologue. It's an extraordinary ability to think clearly about historical data, historical trends. And no one I know better understands the connection between politics and government and governing than Doug. A lot of people understand politics and a lot of people understand governing. Doug understands both. It's a great gift and very grateful to you for sharing. So we'll run through the slides. Put up number one, please. And this has to do with something that you and I talk about all the time, wrong track. And a lot of the populist uprising and popularity of Bernie Sanders, popularity of Donald Trump has to do with this decades-long trend towards Americans feeling like the country's on the wrong track. So talk about slide number one, please.
Yeah, just briefly, just two things. What I said at the run-up to the 2024 election was you can't understand the 2024 tree unless you understand the forest that it's sitting in. And my deck, which I think you probably distributed, but I have a lot of slides that explains that forest. And the other thing, what I believe is that Donald Trump did not cause what's happened in America. He's a symptom of it, and it has to go back to beginning in the early 70s with the decline of the middle class and a whole variety of other things. So in the last 20 years, which what the slide shows, for the last 20 years, a majority of people in this country believe the country is on the wrong track, regardless of who's in power. So it's not like we're in a bad mood. It's like we're in a bad 2.5 decades. And if you look at this chart, you'll see, I guess I should make one other overriding observation, which is a lot's going to be made in the next 9 days about the first 100 days of the Trump presidency. And I think, since Roosevelt was president and passed most of his New Deal legislation in the 30s, we've used the arbitrary 100-day mark as a way to evaluate where the new president stands. And I don't think that's really the right place. I think it's more like Labor Day and I have a bunch of charts I can show you with preceding presidents. So it's a little early to really have a sense about how well Trump is doing, which we can talk about. But here you can see that over a majority of the country believes we're still headed in the wrong track, and it's been over 20 years now. But you look at each of these presidencies, and remember, if you look at this chart, this is just the wrong track. So if you look at Bush on the left, when he got elected, a lot of people all of a sudden felt better about the country, Republicans in particular. And so you can see that number went down on the left there. And then you see when he got reelected, again, the wrong track went down. Obama got elected. You can see that at the end of Obama and Trump came in, you see that the wrong track came down. And the same thing happened from Trump to Biden. But the point is, those are the partisan differences where the winners, in this case Republicans, all of a sudden feel better about the country because their guy won. But that burns off. And so the wrong track has gone down since Trump was elected, but it will burn off and go back to the norm that it's been for the last 2+ decades.
Yeah. This slide and all the slides we're going to talk about, plus more that we're just going to make time for today, have already been distributed in my Substack, and I will send them around again tonight with the video of this program in the Substack. Next slide, please. This is about the 2024 election and about how Trump won.
Yeah, so this was really, the country didn't particularly want to vote for Trump, but given the alternative, which was Biden and then Harris, they felt quite comfortable voting for Trump because they at least remember two issues. One is, I think immigration was a real issue. And I think that it was both a real issue in itself, but it's also a proxy for a larger feeling of lack of control and crime going up. But the other was they felt like the economy was better when Trump was president than Biden. But if you look at this slide, you can see that Trump's unfavorable numbers were the same in 24. It was net unfavorable. It was the same number in 24 that it was when he won that it was in 20 when he lost. So the main point about this is this was really less of a, and I have another slide, to make the case that Trump's victory was less of a mandate and support for him as it was a rejection of the Democrats. I think the next slide.
Yep, next slide, please.
It shows that Harris got 6 million fewer votes than Biden. And you can see that Trump did pick up 3 million votes. But the real difference in this election was the fall off from Biden to Harris. Again, making the case that certainly wasn't the largest mandate victory in history in what Trump calls it.
Right.
It's important to understand, though, the nature of a victory, because the public is telling you something, and when you look beyond the winner and losers, you need to go beneath the surface to understand what the public feels and why. And then theoretically, you're supposed to govern in line with what the public was telling you on election day. And what the public was telling you on election day was less about voting for Trump and more about voting against the Democrats.
Right. Okay, next slide. And this is a key one if you're thinking about the future. The folks who will decide where Trump's approval rating is, and to the extent you think approval rating will determine how much success he can have. What does this tell us, Doug?
So this is an NBC poll. Every other poll I look at, it's roughly the same. And you can quibble about whether it's 36 or 38 or 43 or 42. But the point is, the vast majority of Americans have a very strong opinion, either positively or negatively, about Trump. And they're not going to change their view no matter what. And so to the extent that people are successful or not in our country, it's what that 19%, how they feel. And the 19% disproportionately in this slide, they voted for Trump, but they voted for Trump almost in spite of Trump. They had personal concerns about Trump, but they felt from a policy standpoint, they not only agreed with him on a lot of issues, but they certainly agreed with him more than Biden and the Democrats. And so while we're always tracking polling, it's really identifying that small handful of people who are actually persuadable. And in 11 out of the last 13 elections since the beginning of the century, the country's voted against who's ever in power. And it's largely that 19% on that slide. And they're voting more against whoever's in power than they are voting for someone. And I think we're still in this kind of semi-close to 50-50 country. And so the balance of power, and where you really need to watch is that slice of the 19, not the 81%.
And do we know how many of the 19 voted for Trump?
I would say probably won them by around 20 points.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The next four slides have to do with the trend in Trump's approval rating overall and on specific topics. So next, please. You can see that Trump's approval rating. You see the lines cross there from approval as more approval than disapproval to now 53-47. This far in, a few weeks short, a few days short of 100 days, is a 53% approval rating is historically bad, correct?
Well, yeah, and if you look at this is a CBS poll. I looked before we went on today. He's averaging now around depending on the poll, 44-45% approval rating. And this was where he is now is largely where he's been during his first term as president. He's the only president now in 2017 when he took office. He's the only president to be underwater at this point in their term. But the polling has shown that the sitting presidents since the early 90s, they dropped on average between around 7 and 11 points from the 100-day mark. So wherever he is right now, if history's any guide, unless something happens just by just the nature of a president settling into office and the country having an opinion, seeing what they've done and whether they favor it or not, history suggests that his numbers are going to continue to go down. Now, he's a little bit insulated because we're such a divided country that he's got a built-in high floor that will stick with him no matter what. But I think he's probably, as I said earlier, closer to 44, 45 right now. But I think the laws of gravity, unless something changes, they're going to push him to the low 40s by Labor Day.
So you think his floor is around 40 or 41?
Well, we used to say in the worst days of the Clinton White House, no matter how hard we tried, we can never get under 40. And if you looked under Trump's first term, when he was doing the craziest things and saying the craziest things, he generally didn't get much below 40. So he had that kind of almost 40 floor.
Yeah. All right. 3 slides on approval on specific things. Next is approval on the economy has steadily declined, as you can see, since Trump took office. Next, disapproval of handling of inflation has increased since he took office, as you can see. And then voters disapprove of Trump's tariff and trade policies since he assumed office. You can see there the disapproval line higher than the approval line. Now, the next one I want to ask you about. Americans believe Trump's trade and tariff policies will disproportionately help the wealthy and large corporations. The people who seem most unhappy right now with the trade and tariff policies are wealthy and large corporations. So what do you think drives the public opinion on that issue?
Well, I think that Trump got elected largely by the overwhelming belief by both the left and the majority of people from the left and the right that the system is rigged and that it's rigged in favor of people with money and power. And so I think they almost go into everything with that kind of bias. But when you look at most of the policies that are coming out of the Trump administration, I think they're largely going to benefit the wealthy and the large corporations, particularly if they can, do what they claim they're going to do on taxes. But this is a two-part problem for Trump. The first is that this is just kind of a built-in bias in our country against people with power and money that really has nothing to do with Trump, or to the extent it does. Trump rode that to victory in the White House. So that's that bias coming into it. And then of course, there's the reality of the Trump policies and who it impacts. And all those slides you showed a minute ago about people's views on inflation and all the rest of that tariffs, nobody in the country has really felt the impact of any of this yet. This is all just, what they think might happen. Right. So we're going to get to reality, as I said, certainly by Labor Day.
Right. Okay. Next, please. This is one of the most interesting and important developments from the last election, which has implications for both parties going forward, which is in the 2024 election, Donald Trump carried people who didn't vote in 2020 by 12 points. Explain the significance of that for the future.
Well, it's, from where I grew up in politics to now, everything's been turned on its head. In the old days, Democrats did better in presidential years and Republicans did better in off years. And the reason why is occasional voters tend to vote Democrat, but they didn't vote in off years. Now that's completely flipped on its side, and that the occasional voters tend to vote Republican, and that's in presidential years. And so if you look at this chart, if you look at the people who did not vote on the right of the slide, the people who did not vote in 2020, Trump carried them by 14 points. And you can see Biden picked up 2, so it was a net of 12 points. And I think the Democrats are poised to do well in the midterms, but they're not going to do that well in the Senate due to some structural problems. But even if the Democrats do well in the midterms, that in no shape or form means that Democrats are going to win in 2028. And if you look at the largest midterm victory, really, I guess since World War II, is Republicans' victories in the 2010 midterms. And they lost 2 years later the presidential election. So I think to the extent that you're focused on who's going to be in power, in the 2028 elections for an open seat, I think you have to look at different sets of issues and data than you're going to look at for the midterms.
Right. We're going to get to 2 Democratic slides in a second that speak to their challenges, but just an update on what I said earlier about Elon Musk. He said on the Tesla earnings call that he's going to drop down to 1 or 2 days a week starting next month, helping the government, but that he's largely going to return to his businesses, including Tesla, and acknowledge that there was some quote unquote blowback and a few bumps in the road, but believes the company's future is still bright. All right, next 2 slides, we'll do quick and then Doug can comment. First, the electorate in 2024 was 6% less Democratic than compared to 4 years ago. Is that kind of shift in one cycle significant or unusual?
Well, the shift is significant, but more important than anything else is I can't remember the last time that people who voted on election day, the majority, a plurality of them were Democrats. It shows a real erosion for the Democratic Party, as I showed you earlier on the 6 million people who voted. The gap between the Harris vote compared to Biden, those were disproportionate Democrats who didn't show up
right.
on the polls.
Right. Okay. Next 2 slides. Also, problems for Democrats. Lowest net favorable rating since the 90s. What do you think's driving that? Why are Democrats so relatively unpopular?
Well, I mean, it's because I think there was a perception that we as a party drove we had the worst inflation in America since the early 1980s. I think people basically everything on election day was on average 20% higher than when Biden took office. And so I think it was economic, and I think that there was a concern that people, for their own personal safety and security, and I think the immigration issue was sort of both a real problem for Democrats, but also was a proxy for just a general sense that there was a lawlessness with the Democratic administration and these big cities around America that were largely governed by Democrats. And lastly, though, a sense that Democrats were cultural elites on how they talked, issues they cared about, all the DEI programs. And so essentially, I think the vast majority, a lot of people in America in the middle of the country thought Democrats were looking down on them.
Yeah.
And they weren't competent to govern.
Next focus group I do, a question I want to ask is of independents particularly is, what Democrat do you think today defines the Democratic Party? I'd be curious to see what people would say, who they identify. Obviously, the Republican Party, they'd say Trump, but I wonder who they'd say symbolizes, embodies the values and policies of the Democratic Party. What would you guess?
So Jimmy wasn't because of the Democrats, by the way. Jimmy Carter defined what it meant to be a Democrat from the day he got elected in 1976 until Bill Clinton was elected in 1992. And the reason was Republicans made sure of that. So I think the answer is now, and will be until the Democrats take the White House back, that the Democratic Party is going to be defined by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Yeah. What about Bernie Sanders and AOC? Less so?
Less so.
Okay.
Well, less so, but I mean, I think they're going to occupy a more and more prominent position in the debate in the next couple of years, and I think the Republicans will gladly put them front and center.
Yeah. Next slide is a follow through on the previous slides, and I think in some ways the most ominous for the Democrats. Voters trust Republicans more than Democrats by large margins on the issues they say are the most important. And you can see some of them there. What drives that? What's causing people to say, I like the Republicans more on the economy? As much as Donald Trump's disapproval rating is down, as you said, if you're better than the opposition, even if they don't like you, you still come out on top. What do you think's driving the Democratic deficits on these issues?
Well, just to be clear, and this is from Blue Rose Research, the bottom right, those three boxes there are the most important issues. And I think, as I said earlier, that certainly, on election day, people overwhelmingly felt by 20 points or so that the economy, cost of living, and inflation was managed much better when Trump was president than Biden and Harris. And I'll just say, I do think that the economy was the main driver in the 2024 election. But I do also think, as I've said before, that immigration was also a really important issue. But I think as we go forward, you can already see it in the polling, immigration is becoming less and less an important issue compared to other issues for the American voter. And while Trump every day is doing every effort possible to keep immigration as the main driver of his narrative right now, the fact is ultimately, I think, Trump and the midterms are going to be decided by these three boxes here on the economic issues. That's really going to drive how people feel and how they're going to vote. And Democrats do have an extreme advantage in special elections and midterm elections with a lower turnout. But as I said earlier, that doesn't in any shape or form necessarily predict how 2028 is going to go.
All right. Let's skip over the next two slides. Just go to the last one, which is about the midterms. I want to start going to folks for questions. So again, if you want to ask Doug a question, please raise your hand. So here is your outlook for Senate and House in terms of what's competitive. Do you disagree with the conventional wisdom that the Republicans will hold the Senate and Democrats are at least a mild favorite to take the House?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the conventional wisdom is right. And in the slides, I lay out in painful detail how education is the single best predictor of how someone's going to vote. And Democrats 70% of the people in America do not have a 4-year college degree. And Democrats now that transcends ethnicity and race are running really poorly with non-college voters. And if you look at the Senate, there are 25 states, which is have 50 senators, where the Democrats are not even remotely competitive due to the composition of who lives in those states. And so if you look at this election cycle, And in the past, you would have big swings in midterms. I don't see, unless there's a complete meltdown in the United States, I don't see any scenario where the Democrats are going to take the Senate back.
Yeah.
They're only too competitive. And then on the House, the most important thing here is there are only 40 seats that are competitive now. So as I mentioned earlier about the Republicans winning 62 or 63 seats in 2010, I think the Democrats will probably have a good midterm in the House. But because there's so few competitive seats, it's going to limit the Republicans' exposure.
Right. Okay. Again, raise your hand if you want to ask Doug a question. Well, Sam, you can take the graphics down and put Doug and myself back up. You'll get the full deck. There's more slides, really interesting stuff. Doug, I want to ask you a few questions. You've referred to 2028 a few times. Are there people who are doing things, prospective candidates that are impressing you? And if so, what? I'm not asking you to say they'll be the nominee, but what do you see people doing that seems smart if they want to be the nominee?
Well, it's way too early. I mean, if you look back in 2009, after the Democrats took the White House back and control of the Congress, it took the Republicans about half a year to try to get their ballast. And what they figured out in June and July of 2009 was they couldn't really figure out who they were, and what they were for, but they could at least agree on what they were against. So they united against Obama and his presidency. And so I don't think the Democrats, we now have no leader. We're the opposition party. We're out of power. So I think the best that the Democrats can do right now with no leader is try to have a clear narrative of defining Trump and the impact that his presidency's had on people's lives, and trying to make the Democratic brand less toxic. But we're only as a party going to fix who we are based on the nomination process and who's nominated. And then they're either going to define the party and win the election, or they're going to run and lose, and then Biden's still going to define the party. Yeah. So the job for the federal, and so the people who I think are best positioned for the Democrats are people who are not part of the federal wing of the party. They're not in Washington. But the fact is, we don't know who's going to be really, who's got the right stuff until they start running. Bill Clinton is, Mark, as you remember, when Bill Clinton first announced in 91 and when Obama first announced in 2007, they really weren't very good candidates. It took the process of a year of being out there to get their voice and be able to articulate their vision for the country. It took a long time for them to figure that out and to demonstrate that they had the right stuff to mix it up in politics.
Yeah.
So we only when we get to see these governors primarily and mayors out in the country, only when we see them starting the campaign in 2027 are we going to get any idea who's really got the right stuff.
Right. Well, let me ask it this way. What's one or two best practices? If somebody called you up, a governor of a state called you up and said, Doug, I want to be positioned to be the nominee. What are one or two things that's a best practice to do this year?
Well, I'm going to answer the question the way you asked it, and I'm going to answer the question the way I would answer it. So the way you're asking it is you should be moving around and getting to meet people and, just doing introductions and being a relevant voice out in the party. But what's singularly most important, and this is something that Harris never understood or could do, you shouldn't run for president unless you know why you're running, what you're going to do if you're president, and how you're going to articulate that to the American public. So that's the single most important thing that someone can do right now, is to come up with an intellectual rationale of why they want to be president, where they want to lead the country, and how they're going to articulate that in a way that people can understand it and believe it's sincere.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I can't tell you, I'm sure you've had this experience too. The number of people in both parties who want to run for president, who will say to people, including sometimes to me, what should I run on? What are the issues I should run on? It's like, no, that's up to you. And the only thing I'd add to your list is connect it to your bio, connect it to what you've done personally and professionally to say, I understand where America needs to go because of my personal and professional experience. The people who win, to me, they always do that. And again, the people who do poorly typically have no idea what their narrative is. And storytelling is a big part of winning.
So I would say two things. One, to your last point. That's 100% right, because people are so cynical and so disbelieving of everything that comes out of anybody in politics' mouth that you've got to have proof points to be able to be credible. The other thing I'll say for a Democrat, the single most important thing for a Democrat is to be able to articulate a vision in America for the upward mobility for the 70% of people in this country that don't have a college degree. We have to, as a party, be able to show them that we have a vision for them to get ahead in life if they work hard and have an opportunity. And
Totally
that's
agree.
been lost for the last 50 years. People in the middle class have been the ones left behind. We increasingly have winners and losers in our society, and people believe the system is stacked to screw them. And that we have to, as a party, to be able to articulate a vision of how people can get ahead in this country, no matter where they came from and whether they went to college or not.
Two more things for Doug, and then to your questions. Do you consider J.D. Vance a formidable presidential candidate at this point?
I do. I think he can explain Trumpism better than Trump can. And he clearly, I don't think, feels tethered or liberated by anything he's ever said or done in the past in terms of what he's prepared to say and do in the future to get elected.
Yeah. All right. So the Clinton wing of the party, and I'm not putting these words in your mouth. You may not agree, although I bet you do, looks at the pull of the far left of the party as a problem. A lot of the things Kamala Harris that hurt her was a fidelity to the far left wing of the party, a lot of positions she took when she ran in 2020. And I think an unappreciated challenge for these governors who've never been on the national stage is you're invited to speak to liberal podcasters, you're invited to go to liberal events, and those groups are fierce. They give no quarter regarding deviation from their perspective of what the Democratic Party should be like. So, Doug, have you ever heard of a podcast called I've Had It, hosted by a woman named Jennifer Welch? Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
So if someone who was thinking of running for president as a Democrat in 28 said, Doug, should I go on Jennifer Welch's I've Had It podcast? I assume your position would be, I don't know, because I don't know what it is, right?
Yeah. So listen, I've been in politics a long time. There's certain things in politics that haven't changed, and there are a lot of things in politics that have completely changed. And so if someone came and asked me about questions like that, I would tell them I'm the right guy, and they're probably 3 decades too late asking me that.
Right.
And
Okay. So Rahm Emanuel, who you know well, went on that podcast, and Meghan McCain sent me the clip. I could spend an hour semiotically breaking down what I see in this clip about Rahm, about Jennifer Welch, about the current, the present and future of the Democratic Party. I think this clip speaks volumes. We'll watch it, and then you'll say what you see in it, what lessons you draw from it. Please play number 10.
Have you had it with?
I would say we have a series of topics that I think sometimes consume, and the other topics that don't actually get the attention that they should get. And we ended up fighting for the wrong things. We were really south on kitchen table issues. We weren't really good about the family room issues.
I disagree with you. I disagree with you 100
Okay, the only room we were do really well was the bathroom. And that's the smallest room in the house.
That is such bullshit. That is total bullshit. That is buying into the right-wing media narrative. And I'm so sick of Democrats like you selling out and saying this. You know who talks about trans people more than anybody? MAGA. Kamala Harris talked about home ownership. She talked about kitchen table issues. Trump's over there droning on about Hannibal Lecter. Are you kidding me? This is where the Democrats lose, because we're playing the game with the rule book. They've ripped the rule book up and are cramming it down everybody's throat. And Democrats are upset because Joe Biden pardoned his son. We got to fucking fight. They're the gender obsessed weirdos, not us. We're the ones who fight for Social Security. We fight for Medicare. And yeah, we're not going to bully trans people. We're not going to fucking do it.
I'm not again. I'm not.
Look,
fine.
Doug, so I look at that. What do you see?
Well, first of all, I would say my current position is not to go on the show.
Yeah.
So I think that there are, so when I run campaigns, there are issues you win on and issues you lose on. So on the issues that you lose on, you just want to neutralize them so that you can talk about the issues that you win on. I believe, I'm not an AOC Bernie type of person in my background, but I believe that economic populism, where we put great bright lines down as the opposition party about the party of opportunity, and trying to rebalance the playing field, which is a lot of AOC and Bernie's views. I think that is exactly the part of the narrative that we need to do going forward. But we should not be in the land of these social issues and dealing with these issues that a lot of people have the luxury of deciding to worry about it. For the vast majority of people in America, this is not where they are and not what they think or care about.
Yeah. If you were an advisor to Rahm or some other Democrat thinking of running in 28, what would you tell them your lessons were? Besides, don't go on that show. What would your lessons be from that clip?
Well, the clip, I'll go back to the bottom line is you got to have a vision for the future. You've got to talk to 70% of these people in this country who have a college education. You have to give them a path forward that they can have they can get ahead if they work hard, and that you should do everything possible to neutralize these social issues. We are a center-right country. We are not a bunch of crazy liberals on social issues, and we should not be parked there.
Yeah. All right. Let's bring folks in. Suzanne and Bella brought you both in because we're a little bit short of time because we've had a great conversation. Suzanne, you first tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind for Doug, and then Bella, and then Doug will answer both.
Hi, Doug. I'm in Northwest North Carolina, a very rural area. And I wasn't going to raise my hand until I heard that clip. And then I just said, that's it. That's the issue that the Democrats don't get, the trans issue. They want to sweep it under the rug and say, oh, it doesn't matter. But it matters to a lot of Americans because it isn't about letting trans people into spaces. It's the idea that a man is telling a woman what it means to be a woman. And that really doesn't fly with the majority of women.
Okay,
I mean,
Suzanne. Yep. Okay,
Okay.
hold on. Thank you for that. Bella, tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind. And again, Doug will address both.
I'm in New York, Westchester County. Voted for Trump once, been a Democrat for a long time. Did not vote for Biden. I'm a little depressed that you think that Biden is the picture of the Democratic Party or the face of the Democratic Party at this point. I think the problem with the election was the economy. Even the border issue was the economy because these people came in and undercut workers. So, I didn't know AOC and Bernie are walking around the country talking about the oligarchs. I mean, there's more money in the Democratic Party than there is or it would seem to be in the Republican Party. Hillary Clinton had more money than Trump when he won. So I'm not sure how the Democrats are going to move forward.
Okay, Bella, thank you both. All right, Doug, if you could address them both, Suzanne and Bella, one on trans and one on the image of the party.
Well, just to be clear, I mean, the last people in the world that want Joe Biden to be the standard bearer and image of the Democratic Party are Democrats. So we're not trying to do that. The Republicans are going to do that. And there's right now recency bias that you take young people. When I started in politics in the early 80s, young people were getting in college coming out. All they knew was Ronald Reagan was a Republican and Jimmy Carter is a Democrat. Okay, if that's my choice, I'm a Republican. And those people stayed with the Republican Party their whole lives. Young people in the last 4 years have said, at least men, okay, so I've got Biden as a Democrat and Trump as a Republican. I'm going to be a Republican because that's my choice. And they're going to stay that way. And so the Republicans are going to make it their business to make, as long as possible, Joe Biden define the Democratic Party.
And who would you?
Pardon?
Who would you so what Mark asked, who's the face?
Oh, you can't, you have no way of knowing right now. And I mean, my God, look how different the country is now than it was 6 months ago. Can you imagine how different the country's going to look 6 months from now than it is today? And we're supposed to have some idea of who's the right person to run for president 3 years from now. We have no idea what our country's going to look like. But we have 1.5 political parties in our country. We have the one party that controls the White House, and then the half party is the opposition. And so we're going to have one shot with one candidate who can prove they have the right stuff to get through a primary. That person is going to be the person who's either going to get the Democrats out of their hole that we're in, or we're going to go through 4 more years out of power. But right now, I have no idea. But it's going to have to be someone from America that understands people's lives because that's where they're from. It's not a bunch of people in Washington trying to figure out how to talk to those people in America.
And what about Suzanne's question about trans?
Well, I just think, I think there's a bigger problem that Democrats have, which is a sense that we're not running a meritocracy around here. A lot of people resented the fact that based on your race or ethnicity, you got special treatment. not, and I think the trans is a whole nother set of basically identifying people by some special way and treating them specially. I don't think 99.9% of people in America care about this issue, want to talk about this issue, and I think it's a mistake for Democrats to be parked there.
You're not correct about that. It's a huge issue among women, especially women who have daughters who are
Right.
involved in sports, or women who are in sports, or women who don't want men coming into their locker room, or having men tell them that they think they know what it is to be a woman.
Oh,
It's a huge issue for
wait,
women.
wait. So you're saying it's a huge issue and that it hurts the Democrats?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yes.
completely agree. I completely agree with you that. And by the way, some elections I predict the outcome correctly, and some of them I got it wrong. I was certain we'd have the biggest gender gap in history in this past election. And you know what? The gender gap narrowed. It is the lowest margin difference between men and women since 2008. Now, I think the primary reason for that was economic, because women are disproportionately, were hit harder by the inflation. But I completely agree with you that this issue also played into it, not only as an issue, but as a proxy for a broader sense that Democrats were out of touch and a bunch of elitists.
Yeah. Suzanne, the way you phrased it, I don't mean this disrespectfully. I think Doug interpreted the opposite of what you said just because the way you phrased it. So that's, I think, caused the confusion. Thank you, Suzanne. Grateful to you.
Unfortunately, I agree with you.
Yeah. We don't have too much time, unfortunately. So I'm going to get one folks in, but you got to be brief. Brian, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know after you unmute where you're from and what's on your mind briefly for Doug.
Hey, Mark, Doug. I'm in Huntsville, Alabama, the rightful home of the Space Force. I call myself a center-right guy. I was a Biden in 2020. But I really think his cognitive decline and the administration and maybe the broader public's cover of it was a huge issue in 2024. I didn't see much of that in your data, but I really feel like it's prevailing in the perceived lack of leadership or trust in the party. Do you have any data or further thoughts on that?
Well, we had, the election's over now, but if we went and looked at the data from the election and you asked the 75% of the people in America did not think Joe Biden had the mental facilities to run again. It was a gating issue. And all you had to do was watch him on TV with the sound off and saw how old he was looking, and you couldn't get past that. Now, it was unique to him. It doesn't move on after the election, except that, and there's a clip you might want to pull up of Elizabeth Warren answering the question of, did she ever see cognitive decline? And if so, why did she not say he had it? And she looked at the end of that 60-second clip like she was ready to die. And that is going to stick with Democrats, which is, you knew it and you didn't say anything. And this reinforces the notion of elites running the country and not being on the level.
Well, even Harris's immediate response after the awful debate to Anderson Cooper, I think it was, on CNN. I mean, it was just a blatant attempt to cover it with a half-baked answer, and that was on the spot. But it stuck with her. It feels.
It also, though, it insults the intelligence of people.
Yeah.
So, he used to say, I don't know if I'm supposed to, well, I can or can't say on the. It's an old saying, don't piss on me and tell me it's raining.
Yeah. Brian, you're right to point to what the vice president said after the debate. But I go back to, I don't know Joe Biden particularly well. I've known him a long time, but not particularly well. I haven't spent that much time with him. I saw his cognitive decline in 2017. And so for these Democrats to be asked to explain, well, why didn't you after the debate acknowledge it? I think the more fundamental question for history and for accountability and for, again, this image of protecting elites is, where were you in 2017? When it was clear to me that the cognitive decline was pretty advanced in 2017.
And I'll just say, I've known him not well for 40 years. People say he lost his fastball. He never had a fastball.
Yeah, well, that's another important issue. But he had like a slurve or some sort of weird knuckleball pitch. Brian, thank you, and Doug, thank you. Very grateful to you for spending the hour with us and sharing it. Again, I'll send the deck around in my Substack. If you want to read the whole thing, and I recommend it to you. And we hope you'll come back regularly, not just when you have a deck to share.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. All right, tomorrow on this program, another great guest, Charlie Kirk, on whose program I've appeared on occasion. I would say he's a maybe a next generation Doug Sosnik, although he does stuff that Doug never did because there's a new way to communicate now, and he's not unique, but he's definitely unusual. And if you're not familiar with how he operates as a content creator and as an advocate and as part of text chain coalitions, we're going to try to explain a little bit of that with him, and also, of course, get his views on the issues of the day, news of the day. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too. Please join tomorrow night, this time 6 Eastern time, for our conversation here on Two-Way Tonight with Charlie Kirk. And of course, before that, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern time, Sean Dan and I will be here for the morning meeting. And then at 5 o'clock Eastern, right before this program tomorrow, my lead-in, my friend Megan, who sent that great Rahm Emanuel clip to me, so I'm grateful to her for that. Nancy Grace will be Megan's guest tomorrow at 5 o'clock Eastern time. So tune in. 3 great two-ways on Wednesday. We look forward to seeing you there. Thanks to everybody who participated tonight. Please remember, if you're on YouTube, to subscribe to our channel. We're grateful to you for doing that. Have a great night. See you at 9 a.m. with Sean and Dan.